El Chapo will never walk the streets again. That much is clear. But what if I tell you that his successor wasn't any of his sons? That's right, the succession of the cartel didn't fall to any of El Chapo's famous 4 sons, or the Los Chapitos. Instead, El Chapo's right-hand man, Ishmael El Mayo Zambada, took control of the billion-dollar drug cartel. And as you can imagine, this has led to a full-blown...
Tonight, a battle to control the state of Sinaloa, Mexico.
Clouds of smoke billowing from a prison in Juarez, Mexico, as police hunt for at least 25 inmates who escaped.
Now, Mexico's defense ministry has said that it has sent around 200 military personnel to the northern border city of Juarez.
This war has become a postcard for why you should never mess with Los Chapitos. Who exactly are Los Chapitos? Did they eventually get to be in charge of the cartel? And how have they inspired so many people to create so much carnage? Los Chapitos versus El Mayo. El Chapo is one of those men that took the Bible's words, "Go forth and multiply," quite seriously. He is said to have fathered 15 sons, and that might not be all, because several rumors suggest that the actual figure might tally up to 24. Whichever the case, only 4 of El Chapo's many sons have become known as Los Chapitos. They are Joaquín Guzmán López, Ovidio Guzmán López, Iván Arquivaldo Guzmán Salazar, and Jesus Alfredo Guzmán Salazar. These infamous brothers have worked hand in hand to uphold their father's criminal legacy since his last and possibly final arrest. The brothers already began working with their father even before he was extradited to the US. During this period, El Chapo's billion-dollar Sinaloa Cartel was at the peak of its power. In its heyday, the Sinaloa Cartel controlled at least 91% of the world's heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine, and marijuana trade. That amount of control gave them undisputed power in the drug trafficking business. The Sinaloa Cartel were the top dog, which made El Chapo the most powerful drug lord around. And after their father was sentenced to life imprisonment, the brothers were simply not going to let El Mayo have the billion-dollar empire to himself. Because if El Mayo does take control, this pretty much puts an end to any chance of the Los Chapitos becoming the leaders of the cartel. The succession would pass to El Mayo's sons, assuming he doesn't meet a fate like El Chapo's. And at this moment, that seems pretty unlikely. The man has never been arrested or incarcerated, despite the $15 million bounty on his head, and right now, he is the single remaining fugitive of the list of Mexico's 37 most wanted drug lords. Still, El Mayo and the Los Chapitos weren't always enemies. Sources say that the feud between Los Chapitos and El Mayo is far from succession claims on the cartel. As a matter of fact, Los Chapitos inherited billions of dollars in drug proceeds to start their own lives. But the feud might actually be Los Chapitos' revenge against the Zambadas, particularly against El Mayo's eldest son, Vicente Zambada Niebla, and El Mayo's own brother, Jesus El Rey Zambada, for no other crime than testifying against El Chapo. El Rey happened to be the cartel's chief accountant for 15 years, so he possessed vital information about the cartel's financial activities, down to its basic structure. On the other hand, Vicente Zambada was likely to be the man in charge after his father. Vicente was a true narco prince, born and bred. He was brought up in the family business from a young age, and within a few years, Vicente became a force to reckon with. He is said to have trafficked more than $1 billion worth of cocaine and heroin before he was finally arrested and extradited to the US. In a plea bargain that was signed in 2013, Vicente admits working with El Chapo and smuggling tons of cocaine and heroin into Mexico and the United States. Also, he agreed to forfeit a little over $1 billion worth of assets to the US, but the feds didn't let him off the hook that easily. He was also fined $4 million and slammed with a 15-year sentence, which came with testifying against El Chapo. However, this penalty was later reduced because of his cooperation. Surprisingly, the US was eventually lenient with his sentence and even offered permanent residence for him and his family. Well, they probably figured Vicente was likely to be whacked if he ever went back to Mexico. The feds released him in April 2021, but didn't say if he was put in witness protection. To date, no one knows Vicente's whereabouts, and obviously he is no longer qualified for the cartel's succession race. Because of the testimonies of Vicente and Jesus Zambada, El Chapo couldn't weasel his way out of the crosshairs of the law. Instead, what he dreaded most happened to him, as he was extradited to the US and sentenced to spend the rest of his life at Uncle Sam's most secure prison, a place described as a cleaner version of hell, ADX Florence. But apart from Vicente and Jesus, El Mayo has 2 other sons, and their lives aren't any better either. His second son, 38-year-old Ishmael Zambada Imperial, otherwise known as El Mayito, was only just released from jail, but he has refused to go back home. Well, I wouldn't go back if I was him either. Meanwhile, El Mayo's last son, Serafin Zambada Ortiz, and his girlfriend, Norma Lopez, were recently involved in a fatal car accident. Norma was found dead, while Serafin sustained serious serious injuries. Should he not survive, El Mayo would lose the luxury of having one of his sons succeed him. Still, El Mayo's lack of an heir hasn't deterred Los Chapitos from coming after him. El Mayo is seen as the old god. He is stopping the brothers from reshaping the cartel in their own image. This is why the war between both parties has gone on for many years. Recently, the Los Chapitos seem to have the upper hand, as they have been able to take control of territories such as Baja California, Chihuahua, and Sonora. The brothers have also diversified the family business, as they are also now profiting from mining, migrant smuggling, illegal fishing, and more. The Chapitos simply understand that diversification is the key to wealth. Also, in one of their many battles, Los Chapitos allegedly ordered the killing of one of El Mayo's closest associates, El Chino Antrax. El Chino was killed in May 2020. He was once the head of the Sinaloa Cartel's Antrax hit squad and was found dead after escaping probation supervising in San Diego. About a month later, Los Chapitos and El Mayo's forces were involved in a multi-hour shootout outside Culiacan that left about 16 people dead. These instances have helped Los Chapitos get the attention of the US authorities. The US Treasury Department has since sanctioned the brothers under the Kingpin Act, but none of these seem to have had any effect on Los Chapitos. Instead, the brothers have kept the heat up. In February 2022, scores of men reportedly loyal to Los Chapitos laid siege on Caborca, a municipality in Sonora near the US-Mexico border. These men occupied the city for hours as the police were unable to fight them off. Unfortunately, this attack left at least 2 people dead and about 5 people were also kidnapped. These atrocities are the reason why each member of Los Chapitos has a $5 million bounty on their heads. Another shocking thing is that neither of them is in their 40s, and there's no guarantee that they'll all live to see the next decade either. Kids like Los Chapitos are groomed for this kind of life from an early age, and by the time they get older, if they get older, they would have gotten used to so much violence that a human life is of no importance to them. And that is what Los Chapitos seem to be. Violent young men supposedly seeking retribution for their father, while attempting to take control over his criminal empire. But apart from the atrocities they committed together, it's also important to examine each member of Los Chapitos separately: the eldest, the problem child, and the others. The eldest, Ivan Arquivaldo Guzmán Salazar, also called El Chapito. Ivan is the eldest of the 4 brothers and the architect behind the rise of Los Chapitos. Although other sources believe that his younger brother, Jesus Alfredo Guzmán Salazar, is the actual mastermind of the operation, that goes far in telling you how closely knit the narco brothers are. Ivan is the son of Maria Alejandrina Salazar Hernandez, El Chapo's first wife. No one knows the details about his birth, not even the date, month, or year he was born, but what we do know is that Ivan was introduced to the drug world at a very young age, and as a 12-year-old boy, he saw his father get arrested and sentenced to 20 years in prison. In the absence of his father, Ivan embraced the flashy life of crime. Well, it's not as though he would have chosen better if El Chapo was around. He liked to be called El Chapito, Luis, or Cesar, and a couple of other flashy names he could think of. In the mid-2000s, Ivan was awaiting trial for money laundering in a federal maximum prison in Mexico. An event occurred where Ivan got so cold in prison that he asked his father for warm clothing to deal with the cold. El Chapo then asked 2 prison guards to help smuggle contraband clothing to his son, but the guards got greedy and asked for $500,000 in return. Later on, El Chapo had them kidnapped, tortured, murdered, and dismembered. Their mutilated bodies were found on the outskirts of Mexico International Airport. Ivan has also had his fair share of heartbreak, and like most of us, he let his emotions get the better of him. Ivan's love interest was a 20-year-old Canadian exchange student called Kristen Dale. He loved Kristen to the bones, but she wasn't really interested in him. So, on the 23rd of April 2004, Kristen was having fun with her close pals in a truck when several shots from a passing vehicle was directed at them. She died right there, alongside a 23-year-old man called Cesar Pulido, who was also in the same vehicle. Before the shooting, Cesar had a scuffle with someone inside a Mexican bar over Kristen. A few hours later, both of them were shot dead. It didn't take long for the police to figure out who was responsible for the deaths. Ivan faced serious jail time because of the murders until all charges were suddenly dropped, and he was let off the hook. To date, the murder of Kristen Dale and Cesar Pulido remains an unsolved case and a mystery. While in police custody for the crime, Ivan was described in a psychological report as being an anxious, suspicious, reserved, and evasive person with veiled hostility. He became sensitive and probably shows psychological violence towards people that he does not consider on his socio-economic level. Ivan was re-arrested for a couple of other offenses, but he got out of prison in 2008. And what did he do when he regained his freedom? He dove right back into the game. Ivan realized that the cartel was laundering billions by buying cocaine cocaine from South America and trafficking the same into the United States. On top of that, the cartel was growing its own marijuana. Ivan took the initiative and started buying ephedrine from Argentina. He produced methamphetamine in 11 different laboratories and also bought fentanyl hubs in Culiacan. In 2021, the US Treasury Department blacklisted Ivan and his younger brother Ovidio Guzmán López for drug-related offenses. Their assets were instantly frozen and it became illegal for US citizens to do business with them. But long before he was blacklisted by Uncle Sam, Ivan was indicted with a conspiracy to import cocaine, marijuana, and methamphetamine in 2014. Even though Ivan is used to being the one doing the damage and the one people are scared of, he and his younger brother Jesus Alfredo Guzmán Salazar were put through the ringer in 2016. The brothers were kidnapped by members of the rival cartel, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. The experience was literally a face-off with death, but somehow they were released within a week. I know what you're thinking. Where was El Chapo when all of this was happening? Well, after his daring escape from a maximum security prison in Mexico, El Chapo ran free for almost 6 months before he was rearrested in January of 2016. At the time of his kidnapping, El Chapo was being held in the border city of Ciudad Juarez, waiting to be extradited to the US. Times like these were characterized by insurrections from lesser cartels and sudden betrayals from former allies. That's what the Jalisco New Generation Cartel was, an ally that became an enemy. It was an audacious move that wouldn't have happened if El Chapo didn't have to deal with the US. Unlike his father's humble beginnings, Ivan and his brothers grew accustomed to a lavish display of wealth. He's been linked to a Twitter account with over 100,000 followers. The account has his name and a fleet of sports cars as its cover photo, but it hasn't been confirmed if he truly is the owner of the account. The problem child, Ovidio Guzmán López. Right now, Ovidio is the scariest and most popular member of Los Chapitos. He is known as El Ratón, or the Mouse. At first, Ovidio wasn't as popular as his stepbrothers Ivan and Alfredio, but everything changed when he was arrested in 2019. Now, a lot of bad guys get nabbed day in and day out, so it's no longer a big deal with the cartels. The best they could do is attempt to escape or possibly wait out their sentence. But the case is quite different with the leaders of cartels. A perfect example was El Chapo's daring escape from a maximum prison in Mexico. Although the incident will remain forever intriguing, Ovidio seems to have beaten his own father's record, not once, but twice. Ovidio's first arrest. On October 17, 2019, 35 Mexican security forces stormed an apartment in Culiacan and arrested El Ratón. Unfortunately, they did not anticipate retaliation from the Sinaloa Cartel in the magnitude that it occurred. The news of Ovidio's arrest spread around the city like wildfire. His captors, aware of the unfolding violence, obliged Ovidio to tell his men to stand down, but that plea fell on deaf ears. Over 700 members of the cartel filled the streets of Culiacan, brandishing weapons of various magnitudes. I'm talking about rocket launchers, grenades, 50 caliber rifles, grenade launchers, and heavy machine guns. They came in armored vehicles and even wore bulletproof vests. The sight of them was probably terrifying, such that citizens nicknamed the whole incident Culiacanazo, meaning the Battle of Culiacan. Citizens watched helplessly as their vehicles were burnt to a crisp. Even the major roads were blocked. What was more devastating was the sense of insecurity that the residents could do nothing about, all because of one man, Ovidio Guzmán López. In a matter of hours, the streets of Culiacan were empty, and those who were lucky enough to be indoors before the violence peeked out of their windows to film the cartel members firing into space and dancing to the rhythms of their narco corrido music. Some of them drove around the city at reckless speeds, shouting and cursing as they went. It was chaotic. What makes this even more fascinating is that some of the armed men were just cartel admirers, including children who had been recruited that very day. And despite the little time they had to respond, they were extremely organized. I'm talking military-level organization and execution. They took over the local airport to restrict military intervention, blocked highways, and laid siege outside the homes of some military personnel. The government had been cornered, and President Andrés Manuel López Obrador had no other option but to order Ovidio's release. It was an embarrassing moment for the state security forces, but for the narco warriors, they held drag races around town in celebration of their victory. After some hours, a state of calmness eventually returned to the city, as the Los Chapitos had finally withdrawn their forces after hours of terror. But that wasn't the end of it. Barely 3 weeks after the chaos, an officer involved in the operation to arrest Ovidio Guzmán was brutally murdered. He was ambushed by suspected members of the Sinaloa Cartel, who took off after raining 150 bullets on him in broad daylight. Most people believe that Ovidio gave the order for the brutal assassination. Although the Mexican government insists that there were no casualties in the failed operation, a news report showed that 9 American citizens, which included 3 women and 6 children,
Fox News alert now on this arrest linked to the brutal murders of 9 Americans in northern Mexico. That suspect found holding 2 hostages who were bound and gagged, as relatives speak out about the attack by cartel gunmen that left 3 women and 6 children dead.
arrested again. Ovidio's next arrest was on the 5th of January 2023. The Mexican government launched another operation to arrest Ovidio Guzmán, and this time they meant business. The North American Leaders Summit was a few days away, and the country was expecting top leaders like US President Joe Biden and Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau for the summit. So President López Obrador realized having Guzmán on the loose wasn't the best idea. But analysts believe that Guzmán's arrest was a political move from President Obrador rather than a sympathetic concern for security. Some say he may have wanted to show the US and Canada that he had things under control. Still, chaos struck the city of Culiacán for the second time in 5 years. The state suspended school and administrative activities in the area as residents tried to save themselves and their families. As the violence ensued, an army colonel was ambushed in the town of Esquinapa by cartel members and brutally killed. The trigger-happy sicarios created blockades around the city with burnt civilian vehicles, then shot at a commercial and military plane, which forced the shutdown of the Culiacán airport. Also, the terrifying shootout between Sinaloa Cartel members and Mexican soldiers resulted in 29 deaths, 10 on the side of the military and 19 from the cartel. At the end of the day, the operation was a success, and Ovidio Guzmán was thrown into Altiplano maximum security prison, the same prison his father once escaped from and where his elder brother Iván Arquivaldo Guzmán Salazar was once held. Ovidio Guzmán currently awaits extradition to the United States. Amongst other things, he has also been charged with producing and distributing fentanyl in the US. The other brothers, Jesus Alfredo Guzmán Salazar and Joaquín Guzmán López. Jesus Alfredo, also known as Alfredillo, Alfredito, or El Gordo, doesn't have a track record of crimes like his elder brother Ivan, and aside from the $5 million bounty on his head, which now seems like a family affair, Alfredillo may only have been arrested a few times. But in spite of this, Alfredillo is one of the names on the US financial sanction list under the Kingpin Act, and among the Los Chapitos, Alfredillo is also the only one who is wanted by the DEA. The feds are on him for coordinating the transportation of narcotics from Central and South America to Mexico and then into the United States, for dispensing said drugs to wholesale customers in the United States and then collecting drug proceeds from customers in the United States to transfer to Mexico on behalf of the Sinaloa Cartel. As you already know, Alfredillo was kidnapped alongside his brother Ivan by the Jalisco New Generation Cartel in 2016, and, ironically, El Mayo quickly intervened and paid off their abductors. Well, Alfredillo never got over that experience. A couple of weeks after their release, he fled to Medellín, Colombia, where he was protected by Pablo Escobar's former hit squad, La Oficina. He settled down in a city outside Medellín called Envigado. However, Alfredillo wasn't aware that a government informant was watching all his moves. According to the informant, Alfredillo went around in a bulletproof SUV and an escort of 15 armed men who never showed their guns in public. He also set up 2 cocaine labs, which had a total of 20 workers and were protected by La Oficina. In exchange for their protection, Alfredillo shared a little from the drug proceeds with the hit squad. His cocaine labs were producing about 100 kilos a week and then shipped about 400 kilos into Mexico every month. Alfredillo is also a man that believes in the work hard, play hard mantra, and just because he was in hiding doesn't mean he has to stop partying. He was regularly seen in high-end towns like Poblada and Las Palmas, where he spent a fortune on private parties. But when the FBI and the DEA got wind of his location, he took off, only to return months later and continue where he left off. While Alfredillo might have been a runner from the cops and opposing cartels, he is someone that has continually shown that he fears no one. Joaquín Guzmán López. The youngest of Los Chapitos, Joaquín hardly ever pops up on your radar. According to DEA reports, Joaquín and his brother Ovidio inherited a massive lot of narcotics proceeds after the death of their brother Edgar Guzmán López in 2008. The US believes that Joaquín and his brother Ovidio are overseers of 11 methamphetamine labs in Mexico. There, they produce an estimated 3,000 pounds of methamphetamine every month. And where do you think these drugs go? The United States and Canada, of course. Also, in April of 2018, Joaquín and Ovidio were indicted by a grand jury in Colombia and charged with conspiracy to distribute 1,000 kilos of marijuana, more than 5 kilos of cocaine, and 500 grams of the new stuff, methamphetamine. Besides the obvious, people don't know much about 36-year-old Joaquín. And as for Edgar Guzmán López, he too was a top player in the Sinaloa Cartel while he was alive. He coordinated a transportation network of cocaine and heroin through the cartel's secret border tunnels. Like the rest of his family, Edgar escaped from jail the few times he was arrested, and he was also wanted by the DEA. One day, Edgar was taking a stroll around a shopping mall in Culiacán when he was shot dead by members of a rival cartel, the Beltran Leyva. Sources say that his body was riddled with about 500 bullets, which made him partially unrecognizable. Edgar left behind a wife, Frido Muñoz Roman, and a 2-year-old daughter. To this day, a monument built by his own family stands at the exact spot where he was killed. But some sources also believe that Edgar's death may have resulted from a tragic mistake by his own people, the Sinaloa Cartel. allies and enemies. Los Chapitos have only one enemy, El Mayo Zambada. But if you're thinking about the conflict they're also having with their uncle, El Guano, then the number doubles to 2. And if you're also thinking about the rival cartels, particularly the Jalisco Cartel and possibly the Beltran Leyva, and other cartels that might revolt against Sinaloa rule, then we're talking about a pretty long list. El Guano, for instance, believes that the succession should fall to him, since he is the eldest of the Guzmán family, but his claims have only resulted in gunfights between him and the Los Chapitos. Sources say that El Guano has overwhelming control over the cartel, perhaps even more than El Mayo Zambada. The respect and power he commands are part of the reason he believes that he should be the cartel's boss. Well, whether he succeeds or not, El Guano also has a $5 million bounty on his head, courtesy of the US government. The future of the Sinaloa Cartel. The Sinaloa Cartel remains active in distributing drugs throughout the US. Currently, they focus more on making and distributing fentanyl, which looks like pharmaceutical-grade oxycodone pills on the outside, but do not contain the slightest trace of oxycodone. Unfortunately, people who weren't lucky enough to notice the difference have died from accidental overdose. However, sources say that the cartel redesigned the fentanyl pills by making them more colorful, and the same goes for the fentanyl powder. Also, the feds have revealed that the city of San Diego, Southern California, has become the epicenter of fentanyl trafficking. As for what the Los Chapitos are up to right now, I'd be willing to bet you have an idea. The succession fight is as intense as before, despite Ovidio being in jail. The remaining 3 are fugitives, well, till the day the law catches up with them, too.